You're listening to the Fresh Hell podcast. Fresh Hell contains stories of a disturbing and often graphic nature and is intended for a mature audience. Please don't let your kids listen to this, or they might turn out like us.
Hi, I'm Annie from the US.
And I'm Johanna from Austria, and you're listening to your favorite international podcast. The podcast hosted by two women who never met in real life, and that's probably the only thing keeping us out of real trouble.
Can you imagine? Before we get into this week's story, we of course want to send a massive thank you to all of our patrons. You are the reason that this podcast keeps going, and we are so grateful for your support. If you want to help us keep telling the darkest, strangest stories from history, you can also join us on Patreon. You'll get early access, bonus content, live get-togethers, and the occasional blooper reel. Head over to patreon.com/freshhellpodcast to join the rest of the Hellions over on Patreon.
We also have a new patron who just joined before we recorded this episode, and that's Lindsay Fix. Welcome, and thank you so much.
Thanks, Lindsay. And if you out there listening want to know more about all the other ways you can support our weird little podcast, please listen until the end, because that's when we'll tell you more. Now it's time for today's story, and I'm very excited. It's a historical crime from Austria.
That's right. Very history heavy today. And it's a kind of crime we haven't covered yet. I think espionage. And it's all set right around the outbreak of World War I, or how it was known back then, the Great War. And I know I've talked about this several times already, especially in the episodes about the Habsburg tragedies, but I still need to set the scene at least a little bit. Also for listeners who might have not listened to any of the other episodes where we touched on this. We are traveling back to the late 1800s, back when Vienna was still the beating heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. An empire that stretched from the Bohemian forests and the Galician plains in the north, down through the Alps, and all the way to the Adriatic coast and the edges of the Black Sea. In Vienna, the cobblestone streets were full of carriages, soldiers in dress uniforms, university students arguing about socialism in cafes. And under all that pomp and waltzing and architectural grandeur, things were already starting to rot and to crumble. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, also called the Dual Monarchy, was established in 1867 as a kind of emergency power-sharing arrangement between the Austrian and the Hungarian halves of the Habsburg domains. It was a compromise, and like most compromises, it made no one truly happy. It was an empire of 11 major ethnic groups and even more languages, religions and rivalries. People spoke German and Hungarian and Czech and Polish and Italian and Ruthenian and Romanian and Slovak and Serbo-Croatian, Yiddish, and more. You had Catholic clergy, you had Jewish intellectuals, you had Orthodox villagers, Muslim Bosnians, and everyone else trying to not get swallowed in all that chaos. The only thing holding it all together was a very old emperor who still expected loyalty by divine right. An emperor with very conservative ideas ruling a vast empire through an overabundance of complicated bureaucracy. Something that is to this day very much ingrained in our culture and mindset, I might say. By the late 19th century, the cracks in the gilded imperial surface could no longer be ignored. Nationalist movements were gaining grounds everywhere. The Hungarians had already gotten their half of the deal, but now the Czechs wanted more autonomy. The South Slavs wanted their own state, and the Poles were eyeing independence. But Emperor Franz Joseph wasn't willing to grant more autonomy to any of the crown lands. He'd come to power during the revolutions of 1848, when he was just 18 years old, and he would stay on the throne until 1916. That's nearly 68 years, longer than Queen Victoria, longer than anyone else in Habsburg history. During his reign, the world industrialized, modernized, electrified, and eventually caught fire. And Franz Joseph just kept showing up in the same uniform, expecting everything to stay more or less the same. He outlived his wife, his son, and his brother. And I think the fact that he had come to power during a time of extreme social unrest and revolution sweeping through Europe had left Franz Joseph deeply conservative and frankly, probably a little traumatized. He trusted the army more than he trusted parliaments. He believed in order, loyalty, and the divine right of Habsburg. And so the military became the backbone of the state. Not just for defense, but for holding the whole shaky structure kind of together. That also meant intel was critical. The Austro-Hungarian military needed to know what the Russians were up to, what the Serbs were planning, whether the Italians were scheming to take back territory. This was an empire surrounded by potential enemies, and its own internal divisions made it even more paranoid. So, it developed one of the most advanced espionage networks in Europe. Surveillance, counterintelligence, spies. And let's not forget Russia in all of this. The Russian Empire had ambitions of its own. It saw itself as the protector of the Slavs, especially the Serbs. Pan-Slavism was gaining momentum, and the Tsar liked to position himself as the big brother of the Balkans. That made him the natural enemy of Austria-Hungary, which had annexed Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908, further antagonizing Serbia. All this was a powder keg, and everyone knew it, and all it needed was a spark. And as we know now, that spark came in Sarajevo in 1914. But in the years leading up to that explosion, the intelligence was already in full swing. Austria-Hungary had a highly structured espionage system with the Evidenzbureau at the center of it all. Evidenzbureau. That name sounds like something straight out of some Kafkaesque short story, I'd say.
It really does.
Or you know what else? Did you ever watch Brazil?
No. Mm-mm.
That's based on kind of Kafka. That place probably was called the Evidenzbureau. It sounds like a place you'd find on the 5th floor of a government building where the lights flicker and no one makes eye contact. Everything is like bluish grey.
Yeah,
but it's not. This was the Austro-Hungarian Empire's military intelligence agency, and it was actually one of the oldest in Europe. It started out in 1850, so not long after the revolutions of 1848, which makes sense, right? You wanted to know, well, were people still planning a revolution? And its job was simple. Know what everyone else is doing before they know what you're doing, especially those Russians.
Always with the Russians.
At first, the Evidenzbureau focused only on external threats. They were supposed to collect information about foreign armies, how many troops, where were they stationed, what kind of weapons they had, the usual. But that changed after 1866 when Austria got humiliated by Prussia in a war that lasted just 7 weeks. After that, intelligence became not just useful, but absolutely necessary. The empire was just too big, too fragile, and too surrounded to take any chances, and so the Evidenzbureau quietly grew into something much bigger. By the end of the 19th century, it was doing a little bit of everything. Foreign intelligence, domestic surveillance, counter-espionage, monitoring journalists, professors, students, basically anyone who could pose a possible threat to the empire. They opened mail, they intercepted telegrams, they kept secret files. And they were especially obsessed with those Russians. Russia and Austria were in this constant geopolitical staring contest, as I said, especially over the Balkans. That meant Russian spies were everywhere, or at least Austria thought they were everywhere, which in practice meant everyone became a suspect. Which finally brings us to the main character of today's episode, Alfred Redl. And I have to say the records on Redl's personal life are somewhat limited because that's how the empire handles scandal and shame, keep everything kind of quiet and makes things disappear. But I'm going to give you all the info I could find. Alfred Redl was born on 14th of March 1864 in Lemberg, and back then that was the capital of the Austrian crownland of Galicia and Lodomeria, and that's now Western Ukraine. He was the fourth of either 9 or 7 children, depending which source you trust, and his parents were Franz and Mathilde Redl. Franz Redl had served in the Imperial Infantry Regiment Hoch- und Deutschmeister No. 4, where he reached the rank of Unterleutnant zweite Klasse, which is, I think, second lieutenant. So he basically reached the lowest officer rank at the time. The problem, though, was that he wanted to get married, but couldn't afford the Heiratskaution, the marriage deposit required of officers who wanted to marry.
I'm sorry, marriage? There was a marriage deposit? Was there a layaway? How did it work? Tell me more.
That's right. So
Say
it was
more
like
words.
I love it. It was like a financial security blanket for the army. So you had to prove, as an officer, you had to prove you could afford a wife before they'd let you get married. The idea was that the marriage might distract you or worse, bankrupt you, and the army couldn't have officers dragging their personal drama into the, chain of command. Also, if an officer died or he went bankrupt or he had to resign, that deposit could be used to support the widow or the children or cover debts, basically. So if you couldn't afford the deposit, too bad, that meant no wedding for you. So in theory, this was about financial responsibility, and in practice, I think it was more of a way to keep poor but capable men out of the officer class. And just so you get a sense of how impossible this was for someone like Franz Redl, for junior officers, it could be anywhere between 1,000 and 2,000 gulden, which was more than a year's salary for most of them.
Wow. That's worse than the 3-month salary on a diamond ring deal. Like, how is anyone supposed to save that much money?
Yeah. So for Franz Redl, it meant giving up his career in the army. At 31, he left the army, married Mathilde, and went to work for the Karl Ludwig Bahn, which was a private railway company that would later become part of the state railways. And he would stay there for the rest of his life. At the time of Alfred's birth, Franz was working as an Expeditor zweite Klasse in the material department in Lemberg, earning 700 gulden a year, which is a steady and secure job that provided him and his family with the means for a modest life. He was eventually promoted to Stationsvorstand or station manager, and in 1867 he received the Goldenes Verdienstkreuz, so the Golden Medal of Merit, for his role during the Austro-Prussian War the year before. When Franz died in 1875, he was 55 years old and held the title of Offizial in the Lemberg Material Depot, earning a final salary of 2,400 gulden, roughly equivalent to that of a lieutenant colonel in the army. So you can see this was a hardworking man slowly but steadily climbing up the career ladder.
That's really impressive that he left and was able to make so much of himself and really have...
I think so too.
Because that was a risk then, right? Like, you're really risking a known thing for a maybe thing, for love. And it paid off.
I mean, the railway also was a really steady and good job opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. After his death, the family lived on a relatively small widow's pension that was given to his wife Mathilde, but despite financial limitations, the Redl children all did remarkably well. 2 sons became professional military officers, one became an architect, one a lawyer, I think, and another one followed in his father's footsteps as a railway official. The daughters became teachers, and crucially, Franz Redl had made a deliberate effort to raise all of his children trilingual in Polish, Ruthenian, and German. In a place like Galicia, where switching languages could mean switching social categories, multilingualism was a real asset. And for Alfred's future career, it was not only, I'd say, an advantage, but it was necessary as an officer in the Austro-Hungarian army to speak fluent German and other languages.
It's amazing. It's an incredible gift to be able to raise your children. And it makes me sad because I've known a lot of immigrant families who have moved to the US, like whose kids I was friends with. And in a lot of cases, they stop speaking their native language and in an effort to learn English and sort of join the community, which is great, but it's so sad when they then lose. I know a lot of children of immigrants who don't speak the language they were born with.
I think it's the same with dialects. Dialects are disappearing because children are ashamed to speak dialects. I see it here in Austria all the time, and it makes me sad because it's such an important part of history and culture in a way.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just such a gift to have that ability.
Alfred Redl's early education was at the Unterrealschule, a secondary school with a more technical focus, but it was clear early on that his future lay in the military. And at age 15, he entered the Imperial Royal Cadet School in Karthaus, which is a suburb of Brünn, modern der Brno, in the Czech Republic, and that's not even an hour drive from where I live now.
Nice.
Fun fact. And because his father had been an officer in the past, Alfred was allowed to attend for free. This was one of those rare backdoors into the officer class for boys of non-noble backgrounds. And Alfred Redl made the most of it. He graduated in 1883 as a Kadett Offiziersstellvertreter, so which is essentially a junior officer candidate. It's a little bit hard to translate not the words or the titles of the ranks, but the position.
Right.
The function of the ranks.
Yes.
I'm trying my best to kind of give you what it could be called.
I think you're succeeding.
I hope it all makes sense.
So far, it all makes sense. I'll let you know.
So then he was sent back to Lemberg to serve with the Infantry Regiment No. 9. And he spent 4 years there working his way up. And in June of 1887, he was promoted to lieutenant with absolutely glowing evaluations from his superiors. That same year, he began eyeing an even more prestigious and competitive path, the General Staff. In 1892, Redl applied to the Imperial and Royal War College, the Count K. Kriegsschule in Vienna, the elite finishing school for officers destined for high command and staff positions. Hundreds of men applied every year, but only a few made it through the entrance exams, and Redl was one of them. He graduated in 1894, and from there, his career began to move in a completely different direction, from standard field duty to something more secretive. Because after graduating from the Kriegsschule, Alfred Redl didn't go back to Lemberg or off to some sleepy garrison post in the provinces. He was placed in the General Staff in the heart and brain of the Austro-Hungarian military machine. Redl wasn't just intelligent, he had the kind of mind that thrived in complexity. He understood systems, logistics, human behavior. He didn't just follow orders, he anticipated what the next 5 moves would be. And in the stifling world of the Habsburg military bureaucracy, where most men were still thinking in terms of parades, that stood out. He was also apparently very discreet, meticulous, and according to multiple accounts, he could be rather charming in a little bit cold, distant, precise kind of way, if he wanted to be charming, that is.
It's also like, I don't know, that feels like foreshadowing. Like he could be rather charming if he wanted to be. Okay.
You know, this kind of people who, it has this kind of sociopathic tendencies though, or narcissistic maybe, that's what I'm thinking of. People that can be charming but are not really, like it's not their nature, but they can act very charming.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I picture him from everything I read about his character. By 1900, he had caught the attention of General Maximilian von Redl, who brought him into the Evidenzbureau, as I said, the military's intelligence service. And within just a few years, Redl became its most trusted and one of its most powerful officers. He worked his way up to head of counterintelligence, which gave him access to everything. Foreign agents, internal surveillance programs, cipher systems, border security protocols, even the personal files on high-ranking officers. So he had basically access to all the info. Redl's rise through the ranks was fast. Within just a few months of joining the General Staff, he was transferred into the Kundschaftsbüro, the section responsible for military intelligence gathering on foreign states. That alone was a major vote of confidence. By 1905, he'd been promoted to major, and in 1907, he was appointed head of the Kundschaftsbüro. Not long after, in October of the same year, he advanced again, this time becoming deputy director of the Evidenzbureau. That position made him one of the closest confidants of the chief of the General Staff, putting him near the top of the most secretive and powerful military circles in the empire. Redl also helped to modernize the Evidenzbureau. Under his leadership, they introduced new surveillance techniques, better mail interception, more effective censorships of telegrams, and a rapidly expanding web of informants and planted agents. He pushed for stricter background checks, tighter security procedures, and the classification of sensitive documents. He was especially obsessed with rooting out what the military called unzuverlässige Elemente, unreliable elements. That could mean suspected spies, political dissidents, journalists, or just officers with suspect loyalties or kind of suspect lifestyles. Ironically, it was around that time that the Austro-Hungarian army started to more aggressively monitor the private lives of its own officers, especially for signs of immorality and homosexuality, which was illegal and considered a serious security risk.
In what way did they think it was a security risk? Do you know?
I think the thought process was, first of all, that it was illegal and considered immoral, and you made yourself vulnerable to blackmail. And if someone could blackmail you, they could control you. And if someone could control you, well, you're a danger to the entire empire. I think that was the logic.
Ooh, yeah. Okay, I get that.
But I also think it was kind of a convenient way to exclude people who didn't fit the very narrow definition of what a proper officer should be in the Count K army.
Oh, of course. And what would the picture-perfect officer at that time have looked like?
That's a good question. I'd say the ideal officer was tall, clean-shaven except for the mandatory mustache, perfectly pressed mustache all the time, preferably born with a von in front of his name, so coming from a noble family. He had to speak flawless German, even if he grew up somewhere that didn't, and he knew how to ride a horse, how to handle a saber, how to fence, how to make polite conversation at a dinner table filled with generals and barons and ladies of aristocracy.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, he was supposed to be loyal to the emperor, emotionally restrained, and absolutely morally upright, not politically curious, not personally complicated, definitely not carrying secrets. Ideally, he was Catholic and came from a long line of other obedient, polished men in uniform. I think that would be the perfect officer back at the time.
I mean, I think you've just described my mother's idea of the perfect husband for her daughter. Just a nice Catholic boy.
Well-groomed, well-spoken,
well-groomed,
well-tempered.
polite, nice society.
And a nice mustache.
Nice. I mean, I feel like
An
the mustache is
one.
key. That we can't even go anywhere.
I think mustaches are coming back at the moment. Do you remember that in the 90s when we were teenage girls, it was absolutely like beards and mustache were like, ugh. Because I think we kind of, for us, it meant old men. And now all the young guys are wearing a mustache, like even Timothée Chalamet is doing his version of what he can probably grow.
Yeah, it's true. The mustaches are back. And Alfred, was he the perfect match for this description of what they wanted? Was he it?
On paper, yes, I'd say so. Except he did not come from a noble family. But there was another problem. He actually did have a secret. Because Alfred Redl was a closeted gay man, and not only was he secretly gay, he was gay in an inherently homophobic institution, and he was the one tasked with exposing other gay men, basically, in that institution.
Yeah.
Alfred Redl's betrayal began, at least according to the official timeline, around 1901. Though how and why he started spying is still debated. One version says he was blackmailed by Russian intelligence after they intercepted love letters or photos that revealed his sexuality. And that is certainly plausible. As I said, being gay wasn't just illegal in the empire, it was something that would have ended his career or possibly land him in prison or worse. And it could have made him a social pariah. And Redl definitely knew that better than anyone. But there's another version, and that version is that he wasn't blackmailed at all, that him being gay wasn't even on the radar of anyone. Historians now largely seem to agree that there's no evidence anywhere in the Moscow archives that Redl was coerced. No threats, no compromising letters, nothing to suggest he was exposed and turned under duress. What seems far more likely is that he made the first move, that the contact was his idea, carefully arranged. In fact, it's possible that even the Russians didn't know who he really was at first. That's how cautious and how calculating he was. And he needed to be. He was such a high-ranking officer in the intelligence department. He needed to be very cautious. His Russian handlers would describe Redl, who was simply named Agent 25, as follows in their files on him. Quote, treacherous, secretive, focused, dutiful, soft, gentle voice, more cunning and fake than intelligent or talented. A cynic, end quote. I find that interesting.
More cunning and fake than intelligent or talented. That is interesting. So it's interesting because initially I was like, oh, this poor man, having to live during this really difficult time in history. But now I'm like, wait, so he's, total sociopath. Like he's turning in people in the same situation that he's in. He is profiting off of the misery of others. That's awful. And so he ends up betraying his, fellow gay men and also his country for money.
It looks like, I know for decades and decades the narrative was that he was blackmailed for being gay. But as I said, now it looks like that never happened, that he did it all for money and for the lifestyle he wanted to lead. He loved the finer things in life, things that could absolutely not be afforded on an average officer's salary alone. I looked this up. I hope I'm correct with everything I found. So a colonel in the colonel is the Oberst. Oberst rank, it's a colonel in English. A colonel in the Austro-Hungarian army at the time earned around 7,000 to 9,000 kronen a year, depending on seniority. Don't get me wrong, that's good money. Adjusted for inflation, that would be somewhere between 60,000 to 90,000 euros today. A colonel in the Austrian army today does earn a very similar amount, somewhere between 60,000 and 85,000 euros, with all the add-ons they get. The basic salary is not that much, but they can get some add-ons depending on the position they are in. Redl, by comparison, was pulling in over 50,000 kronen a year from the Russians, plus additional income from selling documents to Italy and France. That's 7 times what he made officially.
Yeah, that's heirloom carpet money. That's a lot of money.
That's so much money. And he very much enjoyed it. He owned 2 automobiles, which was absurdly rare at the time. And still nobody was kind of, that's interesting.
Right.
He kept a full household staff, horses. He had horses. He spent his evenings in Vienna and Prague in the most exclusive venues. He was a regular in private clubs, high-end restaurants. He was always dressed perfectly, always surrounded by the right kind of people. He made generous payments and gifts to lovers, including his last known companion, Lieutenant Stefan Horinka, who was a young Ulan officer who was essentially kept on Redl's personal payroll. The empire's most celebrated counterintelligence officer was living like a prince, and no one questioned it.
This is so bizarre to me. You would think that they would be especially suspicious when it came to someone who had the access to all of this just vitally important info, right? So did he have some kind of official explanation for his wealth? I assume this is like pre-Powerball. Was there a well beyond somewhere?
He did, yes. He said he had inherited the money. And
nice.
That appeared to have been good enough and a reason for his obvious wealth, and nobody ever seriously looked into it.
Well, not only is it a good explanation, but it also gives you even more credit. Because if you are working, in an important job for the government, for the army, and you receive an inheritance that's a windfall, and enough where clearly you shouldn't need to work anymore if you've got 2 cars and all this going on. But, he loves his country.
His country needs him. Mm-hmm.
Right?
True. That's true. Yeah. What's also interesting to mention, or what I would like to mention, is Stefan Horinka. I just mentioned him as Redl's last boyfriend or companion or lover. Well, we seem to have a bit of a grooming situation going on here. Redl started helping him practically as a teenager. Some accounts say that Redl met Horinka when he was just 14 years old, and he helped arrange a proper education for him. I don't know, I guess he knew Horinka's family in a way and kind of took him under his wings. He then even secured him a place in the cavalry regiment in Stockerau. So at first, as I said, Redl took Horinka under his wing and paying for his education even, possibly. helping launch his military career. But by the time Horenka was around 18 years old, their relationship had clearly shifted into something personal or physical. And at least for Redl, it looks like it was deeply emotional. Redl showered him with gifts, expensive jewelry, famously, for example, the iconic gold pocket watch that ended up in a museum in St. Pölten in Lower Austria. Then Horenka rose to the rank of lieutenant in the Ulan cavalry, all because of Alfred Redl. It appears that his reason for getting involved with Redl was, well, I mean, he was groomed as a teenager, but also it was more like denying him would have ended his career completely, I think. He would have been sent probably to some garrison towns somewhere at the Polish or Russian border, somewhere east, yeah.
Not to mention, I assume had he turned him down in some way, it could have really hurt his family as well. Like,
probably,
this
possibly,
guy had enough power to, yeah.
And I know we often say at different times 15-year-old girls were married off to much older men. But a grooming situation is a grooming situation is a grooming situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And yeah, at that time, Redl was in a position of enormous influence. He had access to all the mobilization plans, to everything, all the names of agents operating across Europe, all the names of the Austrian agents. And with the empire increasingly paranoid about Serbia and Russia, these informations were kind of the skeleton keys to the Austro-Hungarian war machine. And Alfred Redl handed them over for money, for status, maybe in the beginning even just to see if he possibly could. I don't know, maybe it was exciting for him.
Yeah, I'm sure it was.
And the Russians rewarded him very well. They knew exactly what kind of men they were dealing with. They paid him in cash, but also in gifts. Expensive clothes, fine wines, travel money, tailored uniforms, all different kinds of delicacies. He bought multiple apartments, including a luxurious one on the Landstrasse Hauptstrasse and another one near the Imperial Court Theatre. And these were places that were fit to entertain, to seduce, to escape. And he did escape there frequently. Redl developed a reputation, quietly, whispered of course, for his taste in younger men, his frequenting of bathhouses, and his very lavish private gatherings, which were described, depending on who's writing, as salon parties or orgies. Which is, I mean, it was immoral, but as long as neighbors didn't complain. In German we say, wo kein Kläger, da kein Richter, which means where nobody is accusing you of something, there's never going to be a judge.
Right.
He surrounded himself with young officers and civilian companions. And I think most of them were likely paid off because nobody talked.
Okay, I'm a little bit confused because you just said that it was illegal to be gay and it could potentially cost an officer their career. But now it's sounding like it just wasn't that big of a secret that he was gay. It was like an open secret.
I know, right? It's a little bit confusing. So yeah, homosexuality was criminalized in the Austro-Hungarian Empire under paragraph 129 of the Penal Code. So technically, Redl was committing a punishable offense every time he stepped into a bathhouse, if it was for other reasons than taking a shower.
Sure.
Or invited someone back to his apartment. But like so many morality laws, enforcement was a little bit selective. If you were poor or caused a scene or embarrassed the wrong people, you'd be prosecuted. But if you were someone like Redl, like high-ranking, useful, polished, and discreet about it, the system preferred to kind of look the other way.
Well, that's enraging.
He was someone with flawless reports, with perfect posture, with the medals and the manners and the reputation for catching spies. And the last thing anyone wanted was to ask questions that might ruin all of that.
And I mean, also, there was a lot going on at the time, right? It's not like things were absolutely peaceful and nobody had anything else to do but look into the personal lives of employees, right?
Absolutely. I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah.
They had a lot of other problems, yeah.
That's right.
Behind closed doors, though, there were whispers, of course. People noticed certain things. His taste in company, the parties, the apartments. But as long as he didn't cause a scandal, no one had to acknowledge what they suspected. Because if someone had spoken up, It would have forced the army to investigate, and if they investigated and found something, that they'd have to take action. And taking action meant admitting that one of their highest-ranking intelligence officers had been breaking the law for years, right under their noses. Also, it's so much work. It's so much work. Who wants to do all the work, the paperwork?
It's so much paperwork. Can we just not?
We shouldn't forget the whole vibe in Vienna at the time. You also have to understand Vienna at the turn of the century. This wasn't a rigid, uptight society in the way we often imagine. It was more complicated. It was more performative, and on the surface, this was the final act of the Habsburg Empire, end of the century. The world was changing. Technology, philosophy, politics, medical advancements, whatever. And it led to some interesting moral fatigue, public virtue, and private vice. Everything was draped in etiquette and gold leaf, but just beneath the surface, it was all anxiety and decadence. People were exhausted by the repression, but still terrified of what freedom might actually look like, so they coped through secret excess, which is all the contradiction you can imagine.
Yeah.
And I mean, in Vienna, on the surface, there was the classical music, the court balls, the cathedral weddings, and behind the closed doors, you had brothels and private salons and bathhouses and opium dens and the whole spectrum of sexuality that officially didn't even exist. Homosexuality was illegal, yes, but as long as you were discreet and had money and didn't get caught in public, it was tolerated. Everyone knew someone who knew someone, but nobody said a word. In Redl's circles, the military elite, the intelligence community, the old aristocratic families, this double standard was just part of life. You wore the uniform, you gave the salute, you made your reports, and then you went to a quiet bar where everyone understood the rules. There was this unspoken agreement: as long as you didn't cause a scandal, you were safe and you were protected. I think that's also why no one was kind of shocked by Redl's wealth or his taste in company or the fact that he was living like a man several pay grades above his rank. The empire was just full of contradictions, and Redl had simply figured out how to thrive within them.
Yeah. So I remember from our episode about Aaron Gillern, who is a missing person, and we were talking about the gay sauna that where he was last seen. Was that one of the really old bathhouses? I just remember the photos looking absolutely gorgeous. Was that sort of what we're talking about here with bathhouses?
Yeah, exactly. So that was the Kaiser Bründel. As far as I remember, that was just a normal public bathhouse with separate amenities for men and women, but I'm sure things were happening behind closed doors. I can imagine.
Sure. Yeah.
Back to Redl, he was having a very respectable position in the army. He rakes in the money by betraying his country. He parties hard and he enjoys the company of young men. But life wasn't only awesome for him when it came to his private persona. Also, when it came to his military persona, things looked super rosy. The promotions kept coming. In May 1909, he was promoted to Oberstleutnant or Lieutenant Colonel. And then just 3 years later, in May of 1912, to Oberst or Colonel. And then, in October 1912, came what looked like a final triumph. Redl was named Chief of Staff of the 8th Army Corps in Prague, serving under none other than Arthur Giesel von Gieslingen.
Giesel von Gieslingen?
Arthur Giesel von Gieslingen, yes, that was his name. Thank you. He was his former boss at the Evidenzbureau. On paper, it was the crowning final achievement of a very brilliant military career. But in reality, it was also the beginning of the end. But Redl didn't really know it yet. Over the years of working as a spy, Redl had given the Russians, and possibly the French and the Italians, full details of Austro-Hungarian mobilization plans against Serbia, Russia, and Italy. Plans that would later have to be completely rewritten under duress just before World War I. Information on espionage activities across Eastern Europe, including the names and locations of Austrian agents operating abroad, many of whom were arrested or killed. Can you imagine who does that? This makes me so angry.
Well, it's still an issue today, isn't it? I mean...
Yeah.
Yeah.
he also allegedly fed false intelligence to his own government, manipulating the empire's perception of its enemies in ways that directly benefited Russia. And, perhaps most chillingly, Redl is believed to have falsely implicated loyal Austrian officers in espionage, getting them removed or transferred so he could protect his own position and kind of confuse the system around him, cover up his tracks. Innocent people. Innocent people that did nothing wrong.
Yeah, it's very upsetting.
But let's not fool ourselves. All this had come with a big price tag as well. As the years went on, Redl became more and more paranoid and more isolated. I think that comes with the territory naturally, right?
Yeah.
For years you have to look over your shoulder. He took increasingly elaborate steps to hide his double life. He was burning correspondence and using aliases, and he was receiving money through post office boxes, for example, under fake names.
Oh, it's exhausting.
It's exhausting. Like, I just want to lie down.
I don't have the energy to lie about anything, really. It's just exhausting. I can't understand intentionally living a life like this.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it was fun for him in the beginning, but then, could he even sleep at night? I really wonder.
Yeah, I bet he could. I think you're right when you were saying it's like a sociopathic thing to be able to turn on the charm when you want to. I don't think he had much guilt.
But maybe that's also why he used to party so much.
Oh, maybe.
To distract him. I don't know. Or maybe he really was just a sociopath. I don't know.
It's hard to say.
So he went to Prague, or he was sent to Prague. He settled in. He had everything just the way he liked it. He was now the chief of staff of the 8th Army Corps. Very prestigious role. But maybe it was also quietly a way of moving him out of Vienna without raising too many questions. Because back at the general staff in Vienna, there had been kind of, I don't want to say rumors, nothing concrete, but I think they started to feel, there was this feeling of something smells fishy here, maybe.
Well, I think at a certain point, if you are unmarried, like if you're a man, but you're not married to a woman, that would be...
I mean, that was obviously, I think it was more something smells fishy, not about his homosexuality, but about what else does he do.
Right. True.
You know what I mean?
Yep, I do.
But Redl in Prague was just living his life. He kept his same rhythms. He went to exclusive clubs. He was sharply dressed. He went to dinners. He had the anonymous post office boxes. The secrets he passed to the Russians were now fewer because he didn't have the direct access to everything he had before, but it was still devastating, and the money kept flowing. What finally exposed Redl wasn't some brilliant piece of detective work. It wasn't a dramatic confession or, intercepted telegram. It was a mistake. It was a mundane, almost bureaucratic slip. It was a piece of mail. By the time when Redl was living in Prague, it became too risky for him to meet with Russian handlers in person. He was this high-ranking officer. He couldn't just sneak off for secret cafe meetings without someone noticing. So instead, they did it the safe and old-fashioned way. Money and instructions were sent to him through the post. The envelopes were addressed to fake names, and he would pick them up at a post office in Vienna, always asking for them to be held post restant, that is, not delivered to an address, but held at the counter for pickup. One of those envelopes addressed to the name Nikon Nicetas, which frankly sounds like something a spy would only come up after one glass of wine too many. Nikon Nicetas.
Yeah, that's a name.
It's kind of I don't even know. Sounds like a Powerpuff villain to me.
I was going to say, it does sound like a made-up villain name. It's interesting choice.
There was this envelope addressed to Nikon Nicetas, but it was never picked up because Redl had missed the window to travel to Vienna and get it. And then when no one claimed it, the post office in Vienna followed protocol and returned it to the originating post office in Eidkunen, which is a town in East Prussia near the Russian border. And that's where things got interesting. The German postal officials, seeing the envelope had come from their side and gone unclaimed, opened it, which they were allowed to do under official rules, which is also interesting. And what did they find? 6,000 kronen in cash and a list of addresses. Not just any addresses, they were tied to spies. And now red flags went up immediately, like wee, all the red lights, alarms sounding.
Oh, man.
This started a big investigation. The German intelligence officer in charge, a Major Walter Nicolai, recognized 2 of the addresses inside as being linked to spy activity both in Prussia and Austria. So he informed Major Maximilian Ronge, who was the new head of the counterintelligence at the Austrian Evidenzbureau. Now they had to come up with a plan to find this person who was hiding behind the alias Nikon Nicetas.
I still can't get over that name.
No, I can't.
It's like, why wouldn't you pick something generic? Like, I'm not going to be able to give you...
Right? Franz Müller.
Yeah, exactly. Like John Smith.
Maybe he was scared that another, like, if it's a common name that somebody could walk in by accident and he's like, hey, I'm Franz Müller, I'm picking up my mail. And then they hand it to him.
That's
like, it had to be something...
unusual.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So here's what they did, because they had already opened the envelope, which would be suspicious, right? So they created a new envelope that just looked like the original. And then they mailed it from Berlin, again to the same post office, hoping the spy would fall for it and pick it up. And then they waited. The state police under Edmund von Geyer set up surveillance at the Vienna post office on Fleischmarkt, the location where Redl had previously collected mail under false names. For over a month, they watched the counter for post restante pickups, just hoping that whoever this Nikon Nicetas was would come looking for his envelope again. And on 25th of October 1913, someone did. Redl showed up at the counter, calm and collected, and asked for the letter. I also wonder, I mean, he was a high-ranking counterintelligence officer, because I'm wondering how did he prove that he was Nikolai Nicetas? Did he have like an ID or something? I mean, I know there was no photo IDs, but he must have had papers under that name, right?
Yeah, I assume he must have had forged.
Because I don't think he walked in his uniform, or maybe he did. That would be an interesting question.
Maybe they just wouldn't question anything.
I mean, if back then, if you kind of walked in with some authority and nice manners and be well-spoken, we know that opened all kinds of doors, right?
That's how I use the bathrooms of luxury hotels while in cities.
That's true. So he picks up the letter and he was followed immediately after leaving the building. And they knew it was Colonel Alfred Redl. He was the spy they were trying to catch. And this was such a shocking moment for the men watching it happen, because Redl had trained most of them. He was their former boss, their mentor, the man who had shaped the very counterintelligence techniques now being used to catch him. Seeing him in that moment walking up to the post office counter, collecting a bribe from a foreign government was inconceivable.
I imagine. So did they arrest him right then and there?
No, not yet. They waited some more because this was Austria-Hungary and everything, especially treason, had to be handled with delicacy.
Well, it's not going to look good for them, is it? To have had somebody under their noses doing this.
Can you imagine? Yeah. I'm sure they were like, what the fuck are we going to do now? Like, what?
Right.
Redl, as far as we know, had no idea that he was sitting in a trap, that any moment now someone would confront him about the big treason, the high treason he had committed over years and years. So he returned to his room in the Hotel Klomser on Herrengasse, right in the heart of the old city, probably happy about having his pocket full of cash. I mean, who wouldn't be?
That's fair.
When Franz Conrad von Hötzendorf, who was the chief of the general staff, heard about the fact that Alfred Redl, such a high-ranking officer, had sold military intel to the enemy, he was shooketh.
Shooketh.
I mean, that guy was already under pressure from political factions in Hungary and the foreign ministry, and he knew that a public trial would be disastrous. It would raise very uncomfortable questions about the army's vetting of officers, its failure to detect years of espionage, and its vulnerability to corruption, and worst of all, it would hand the Hungarians ammunition to demand Conrad's dismissal. So he made a decision. The whole thing had to be handled in absolute secrecy. He dispatched a delegation to quietly confront Redl at the hotel. There's a group of guys, they go there, they knock at his door, and they enter the room.
Oh. And?
Well, they found Redl alone in his room, and he didn't run, he didn't deny anything, he didn't even seem surprised. According to those present, his first words were, quote, "I already know why you're here. I am the victim of an unfortunate passion. I know I have forfeited my life. I ask you to give me a weapon so I can end my existence," end quote. He then gave a brief and calm confession, acknowledging that in the years 1910 and 1911, he had, quote-unquote, served foreign powers extensively. So he just admitted 1910 and 1911.
Mm.
He insisted that he had no accomplices, no co-conspirators. It had all been him and him alone. And they decided that they would give in to Redl's request. They would give him the chance to die in dignity, as they put it. So one of them went to his office, where he retrieved a pistol and a vial of poison from his office and brought them to the hotel.
So wait, a vial of poison? Because this reminds me of the doctor that Lizzie Halliday probably stole the chloroform from. Remember, he decided to end his life by taking poison and then also shooting himself to make sure the job was done.
Also Hitler and Eva Braun did it that way.
Okay. Do we know if it was potassium cyanide?
Because we talked about it last week, right?
Yeah.
We don't really know. It's not stated anywhere as far as I know, but I think it's definitely possible. So they hand him the poison and the weapon, and then they just leave the room. And then they wait. And by the early morning hours of 26th of May, Redl was dead. Gunshot wound to the mouth. Or to the head through the mouth, better. I don't know how to...
Yeah.
I think we can all imagine it. And the official cause of death, of course, was not he killed himself because of espionage or national betrayal. That would have made headlines. Instead, the telegram sent to Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was at the time the army's inspector general, simply stated that Redl had died for reasons yet unknown. The Emperor, Franz Joseph, received a similar message. Later that day, the Neue Freie Presse, a newspaper in Vienna, ran a notice, quote, "One of the most capable and well-known officers of the General Staff, Colonel Alfred Redl, Chief of Staff of the 8th Corps in Prague, committed suicide Saturday night in a hotel in the inner city. The highly talented officer, to whom a great career still lay ahead, is believed to have killed himself in a state of nervous exhaustion brought on by mental overwork," end quote. So then the same group that had confronted him in the hotel was immediately sent to Prague. They were on an express train, and they had to search Redl's apartment. They had to secure any remaining documents and, tie up all the loose ends before word got out. They arrived around noon on the day of his suicide. Well, he killed himself on the night from Saturday to Sunday, right? So they traveled to Prague. It's now Sunday, which meant that no official locksmith was available to open the apartment. What many people outside of Austria, especially nowadays, cannot picture is how non-existent any business is on a Sunday here. Like, no stores are open, nobody's doing anything, right?
Oh, really? Well, that was like here in Massachusetts. We had what were considered the blue laws. We talked a little bit in the Christmas and Sandwich episode about sort of the puritanical beliefs. And so it was only in my lifetime that you could purchase liquor on a Sunday. Stores were able to be open on Sunday. That's all changed, in the last, 40 years, I guess.
Well, here still everything is kind of, the city is so quiet on a Sunday.
I kind of like that in a way
too,
because if nothing is open, it forces you to just sort of relax a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. It's the day of spending time with your family, going on excursions, things like this. I like it.
Yeah. As long as you're not going somewhere to do some shopping in a town.
I also like it because a lot of people working here in, for example, grocery stores, and it's then the only day they have for sure with their family at home, where everybody's home and they can have kind of family time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, so even grocery stores are closed?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice. My sister works in a grocery store and she works 6 days a week. And when it comes close to holidays, she often doesn't have any days off. And it's just crazy. So
When I was a kid, there was still normal that all the grocery stores and all the stores basically would also be closed Thursday afternoon. So you would be open Thursday until noon and then closed until Friday the next morning. And here in the countryside, many grocery stores are still like this. Like Thursday afternoon is closed. It's traditionally here. It's weird. I don't know. I never thought about it as weird because it's normal for me. But
Sure.
So yeah, back to Redl. They need a locksmith because first of all, they need to get into the apartment and they can't just kick the door in. And they also need a locksmith because they assume that there will be locked drawers and hidden things. So they can't get one of the official locksmiths that the state and military would usually use. So they had to get a civilian locksmith. Just a regular guy who by sheer bad luck happened to miss that day a very important football or soccer match. Because of this job he had to take. Sundays also the days. Most soccer games here are on Sundays.
Right, okay.
And now it gets kind of interesting. So he misses this soccer game. I think he was the goalkeeper in the team. There was a local reporter. He worked for the Praga Bohemia, named Egon Erwin Kisch.
Egon, like Ghostbusters Egon. I've never heard that name again.
Really? Egon Schiele?
Is it a Austrian name or German?
A German name, yeah.
Egon. Yeah, I like it. Sorry.
So he was not only a local reporter, he was also incidentally the honorary chairman of the same soccer team the locksmith played for. And so he noticed, hey, our goalkeeper or whatever his position was, he missed this game. So he kind of asked this guy, why did you miss the game? And the locksmith told him, well, I had to open this apartment for Austrian military. And that was kind of suspicious, right? And he was like, something is going on there. That's the apartment of Colonel Alfred Redl, who'd just been reported dead in Vienna. Super suspicious. And he was like, I'm going to write about it. I'm going to investigate. He was an investigative journalist. But because of the strict press censorships, he couldn't publish what he kind of thought happened. So he had to do a workaround. He printed a denial. He wrote, quote, from high-ranking sources, we've been asked to refute the rumors circulating in military circles alleging that Colonel Alfred Redl, who took his life the day before yesterday in Vienna, had committed treason and spied for Russia, end quote.
So they're basically like, listen, we're not telling you what happened, but we're definitely telling you what didn't happen. And this guy was definitely not a spy for Russia who committed treason. So we don't know what's happening, but it's not this one specific thing.
I think that's smart. And everybody knew exactly what it meant. And it started this kind of frenzy, and journalists across the empire jumped on the story. And Kisch later claimed to have single-handedly broken the Redl affair. Nowadays, that's debatable. Also, the whole locksmith soccer team story might have been totally made up. He might have been protecting a much, much higher up informant.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but I think the story is, if the story with the locksmith is true, I think I had to tell it to you.
Oh, it's so good.
This secret unraveling of Redl's treason reached the Kaiser, the Emperor, and the Archduke now through the newspapers, not the military. They had not been told the truth. The official statement for days was that Redl had died from nervous exhaustion. And when the War Ministry finally responded 3 days later, they admitted only that Redl had taken his life while about to be exposed for espionage and homosexual offenses. They conveniently omitted the part where he was given poison and a pistol and kind of encouraged to, do it.
Yeah.
And even the investigations that followed was kind of sloppy. One young man bought Redl's old camera from a second-hand dealer, only to discover it still contained film, photos of highly classified military documents that the investigators had failed to find. I mean, how does it even happen? They were not great at cleaning up and tying up loose ends, I think.
Right. And also you would have thought that they would have maybe found keys in his place. Like, he must have had keys.
True.
Right?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But, wow.
A deeper look into Redl's bank records revealed the scale of his betrayal. over 116,000 kronen had been deposited into his bank account between 1905 and 1913. I think there must have been way more, because if he made 50,000 a year, but this was the official deposits. I'm sure he was very careful also with he might have had different bank accounts under whatever names, right?
Sure.
And he only confessed to 1910 and 1911, and I think that barely scratched the surface.
Right. Not to mention, I imagine he would have had quite a bit of money in cash here and there, because he was getting envelopes of cash.
Yeah, and all the gifts and the money and the apartments and the 2 cars and everything, horses, whatever. Yeah. And now Redl was dead, and the full extent of the damage, I think, could never really be measured until, after the fall of the Iron Curtain, and then the archives in Moscow became more accessible, and it could be looked there what they knew about Agent 25. Redl's burial, it was held very quiet, and it was a deliberate non-event. On 29th of May, his body was taken to the Zentralfriedhof, which is Vienna's main cemetery. You have a cool shirt from there.
I do. I wear it all the time, although I wore it to an appointment at the hospital the other day without thinking. And I got a lot of looks. And I was like, oh, in the waiting room. And I was like, oh, this is a funeral museum in Vienna. And then everyone was like, oh, that's nice. But yeah, there was much side-eye happening in the MRI waiting room.
Love it. The military made sure that it looked nothing like the funeral of a high-ranking officer usually would have looked. There was no honor guards, no officers in mourning, not even soldiers carrying the coffin. It was city cemetery staff that did the job. And there was a basic 2-horse wagon rolling up and driving straight to the cemetery. The doors were quickly closed behind it. It was super hush-hush, yeah.
Yeah.
From what I read, his grave was later vandalized by angry citizens. And then when the scandal eventually faded from memory, a stone was added. But in 1944, the Nazis removed it. Today, the plot has been officially repurposed. Redl's remains are still there, buried in the ground, but with no name above them, and completely different. It's a completely different grave now of different people.
Right. That's so strange to me. We talked about that in the episode 26, right? We discussed the aftermath of Lincoln's assassination and the incredibly wild story of the Rathbones. But that's always a surprise to me. I remember asking my dad the last time when we covered the case with the Rathbones and saying, that doesn't happen here, right? And my dad was like, not to my knowledge, no.
No, because you have a lot of land. In Europe, we are very limited, and
that's right. We have a lot of land, and we're a young country.
Exactly. You have your graves in perpetuity, and we basically rent it for 25 to 50 years, or for as long as somebody pays for it, unless you are, I don't know, like a Beethoven or, somebody of interest to the state.
Fame.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Huh.
So yeah.
That's wild, Johanna.
That's how it ended.
Wow. Do we know what happened to the young man who had been groomed by Redl as his...
Stefan Horinka.
Yeah.
I know a little bit. So after Redl's exposure in 1913, he was tried by the Vienna Garrison Court for the crime of quote-unquote unnatural vice, which means homosexuality. He received a 3-month prison sentence, and I think he had to quit the army, or he was, kicked out. And then after his release, Horinka married, and he had a son, and he passed away, I think, in 1976. And this is so crazy. These are the things that kind of are crazy to me. That's 3 years before I was born. That makes history so you can almost touch it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's yes, 1976. I was born in 77. So my mom was pregnant with me in 1976.
It's crazy. It's really crazy. We're talking about events from before World War I.
Yeah. Yeah. People think the past is so far away, but it's just not, especially in cases like this. I really hope the rest of his life was happy.
Also, I think what Alfred Redl did was not just stealing some documents and selling them to the enemy. I mean, ultimately he betrayed his people, his fellow soldiers who would die in the trenches during World War I. And the betrayal was unprecedented. This remains the only instance in Austrian or Austro-Hungarian history where a senior officer who was literally the head of military intelligence was caught spying for a foreign power. There were other scandals in later years, like the Lemberg affair in 1918, but none to this level of betrayal at the very, very top.
Right to the top.
And
yeah,
by the time he was exposed, he had already passed on all the mobilization plans, the border defenses, the troop strength, the identities of all the spies. This is... so many people died because of that. He had been gone from the Intelligenzbureau for a couple of years by the time World War I broke out, but his fingerprints were all over what happened next. Because when Austria-Hungary mobilized against Serbia in 1940, the Russians responded faster than expected, as if they'd already read the Austro-Hungarian playbook, because thanks to Redl, they knew. So some historians argue his betrayal set Austria back by years. But I also have to say others believe it wasn't decisive on its own. It was kind of part of a larger rot in the empire's military structure. In fact, some argue he became the perfect scapegoat after the catastrophic defeats of 1914 and 1915. You know, someone to point the finger at, it's his fault. The people who argue in that direction say that many of the documents Redl passed on were already outdated by the time the war started, or the Austrian mobilization plans he sold in 1909 had been significantly revised by 1914. But I mean, they had to. Right?
Right. Yeah.
I think the biggest damage was also that he actively prevented new intelligence from being gathered, which created a huge blind spot. And I think that was very dangerous, you know?
Yeah.
Redl might not have single-handedly lost the war, but he certainly helped Austria walk into it wearing kind of a blindfold. And the Austro-Hungarian army entered the war a little bit underprepared, badly informed, suspicious of its own officers, because for years the man in charge of the counter-espionage had been the traitor and tens of thousands of soldiers would die. No one could ever be sure what had been compromised and what hadn't, right?
Right. That's awful. That's, that's still something that's a huge, you see it occasionally in the news, and it's always a plot in films, right? Like, they're going to release all of our agents' names, and, you know, it's, you don't really think of it that often as something that really did happen and affected a lot of people, and also potentially changed the course of history.
Yeah.
It's, what an asshole.
Right?
Sorry, pardon my French, but you're an asshole. It's very hard to forgive people who intentionally choose to make their life better by hurting others and making their lives worse. It happens all the time.
I mean, obviously...
Don't like it.
For the Russian military, maybe less people died on their side because of it. I mean, it all has two sides, but as an Austrian, obviously... this was kind of a big tragedy.
Well, and especially World War I. Like, World War I was such a...
tragic war. Horrible. Horrible.
Awful. Awful. That was really terrible, Johanna. Thank you. I didn't know anything at all about that story.
I hope it was a little bit interesting for our listeners. I know it's very much a kind of tiny area of history, but yeah.
I thought it was fascinating. I'm really glad that you told us about it, because this is the kind of thing I love it when you tell me something about history that I just was not even on my radar a little bit, you know? And I feel like quite a lot of our listeners feel the same way about that. You know, it's because it doesn't just inform us on some specific event that happened, but it gives us context and the historical context. And I know that you say, well, we talked about this before, but I'm not going to remember it because we talked about it once 6 years ago or 5 years ago or however long we've been doing this, you know? That was fascinating. Thank you. Every time you tell me one of these stories, I feel like I have a better grasp of European history, especially because it's just not a strength of mine. And for me, anyway, I just think you bring it to life in such an interesting way that it's just very enjoyable.
Thank you. That means a lot to me.
That was, well, you're very good at it. And that was a terrible, terrible story.
You have something good.
I do. 2 somethings good. 1 recommendation. Have you started watching Murderbot yet?
No.
So I'd had a few recommendations to watch the show Murderbot. I think it's on Apple TV. And we put one on. My dad was up and Paul's dad also has been up. And so over the weekend, we put on the first one just to sort of see what it was like. And we ended up binging the whole, like everything that's out now for like over 2 days. And we can't wait for the next one. And I'm not sure exactly what I thought it was going to be, but I was wrong. It's a half hour and it is kind of funny and the premise is unique. It's I'm just really enjoying it.
I'm gonna check it out.
It's wild. And then my real something good is that I just had a really rare night out. My friend Tam had a Friday the 13th barbecue. And so she said, come as a murdered camper, which was amazing. So she had like Jason themed stuff all around. And, I love a theme. So I dove straight into that. And it was just so fun. I saw friends I haven't seen in forever. Thanks to Kate. Kate is a real life friend of mine who's been a patron since we started Patreon. And she surprised me with the most gorgeous pair of shoes. We have very similar taste in shoes, but my feet are wide and hers are narrow. So occasionally we'll order something and say, I really hope this would work, but here, these are for you. And she gave me some really fabulous shoes. And I also met like our first fan, may I say. I feel like I had my first fan encounter. I don't know that it really counts because it was, so my friend Tam, one of her oldest and dearest friends, Chris, she suggested the podcast to him a while ago. And I think both he and his husband listen, but he definitely listens. So I sort of had my first fan encounter. And I have to say, it was absolutely delightful. Not just because he's a great guy, which he's friends with Tam, so of course he is. But it was so interesting. I hope this doesn't sound conceited to any of our listeners, but it was absolutely fascinating to me to sit down with somebody who I'd never previously met and who then proceeded to tell me like all the reasons why he loves the show and the specific episodes that he liked so much. And it was just really, really nice.
I love it.
I wish you could have been there. So did he. He was like, tell Johanna and say hi. I was like, I will. And then he was like, I almost hope you guys never meet. What if it ruins everything? And I was like, I don't think you're alone in that one. But it was just it was delightful. It was so nice. So shout out to Chris. Hi. So what's your something good, Johanna? Do you have anything?
My something good is something that I recommended several times already, but because it fits with the theme of this episode, I'm gonna do it again. And it's my favorite book of all times. Please, guys, if you're interested in this era, Habsburg Empire before outbreak of World War I, please do yourself and me a favor and go read Radetzky March by Josef Roth. It's available in an English translation. Be prepared to cry a lot.
Yeah, I'm going to read it next. When I finish this current book, I'm going to read it. I'm going to power through when it makes me cry and not give up like last time. I was like, this is so sad.
I've gifted this book several times. I recommended it to several people and everybody loved it. Everybody. And I read it probably 10 times by now. It's just, it's perfect. Yeah, I love that book. I love it. Love it, love it. Please read it.
All right. I'm going to read it. I promise.
So, I think that's it. If you're still here, congratulations, you now know more about Austro-Hungarian espionage than most generals did in 1913.
Hey, huzzah. And if you liked this episode, or even if you just mildly appreciated the emotional damage, please leave us a rating or review wherever you listen. It really, really helps more Hellions find their way to us. Also, please, whenever possible, Tell your friends about us. Tell others about the podcast because nothing helps more than word of mouth.
Absolutely. And you can also support the show on Patreon, where we post bonus content like Cinema Macabre, video extras, all kinds of weird things we can't quite justify on the main feed. And the next live get-together will be on 23rd of June.
Can't wait. It's going to be awesome. And if you would like to hang out with the smartest, strangest, kindest people on the internet, well, congratulations. You just spent an hour with us. No, I'm kidding. Come join our Facebook group. Really, truly, the best people we know are in that group, and it's absolutely delightful. We'll let you in as long as you know the secret handshake. So there's no handshake.
Spoiler alert, there's no handshake.
Spoiler alert.
Our website with all the infos and all the links is freshhellpodcast.com, and you can email us anytime at freshhellpodcast@gmail.com.
That's right. And if you want to send us a postcard or cryptic riddle, a hand-drawn map to buried treasure, just don't send us your bills. We will not pay them.
No, also don't send poop in a Tupperware box, please.
Don't send poop in a Tupperware, please. Please don't. Johanna's worried about it. I don't think it's going to happen, but just don't do it. But yeah, our P.O. box is also listed on our page. And so I think is that everything? I feel like that's everything.
Yeah, that's it. Please tell your pets we said hi. Your dogs, your cats, your horses, your iguanas, and your guinea pigs, and
Skunks.
Everything in between. Your wombats and kangaroos, whatever.
Somebody in the Facebook group was sharing their pet skunk. So cute.
Please be kind to them. Be kind to your fellow human being, and be kind to yourself, because if somebody like Alfred Redl can treat himself so well, you can at least take 10% of his audacity and use it for yourself, I say.
That's right. That's right. It's the hardest. It's so hard to be kind to ourselves, isn't it? But please do it for our sake. We would appreciate it very much. And as Winston Churchill once famously said, if you're going through hell,
geht's weiter. Tschüss.
Bye.